David stood quietly beside his small moving truck, staring at the White House in front of him. The air carried the smell of cut grass, and the sun sat warm and gentle above the quiet neighborhood. It had taken him years of saving, years of working long hours, and years of hoping, but at last he had reached this moment. The house was not only a building made of bricks and wood. For him it was a dream finally becoming real. He stepped back, taking a long look at the place. The front porch looked strong. The roof was freshly painted, and the garden, though simple, had enough space for flowers and maybe even a small tree later. He thought of how his mother would smile if she saw him here. She had always told him that patience and hard work would open doors one day, and now he was unlocking one of those doors for himself. David opened the back of the truck and pulled out the first box. It was not too heavy, but it carried many memories inside. Family photos, books he loved, and small decorations he had collected over the years. Walking toward the porch, he felt proud, steady, and grateful. He unlocked the door, placed the box inside, and stood for a moment in the empty living room. The space was bare, but to him it was already alive with hope. As he went back outside, he noticed the street was almost silent. A few cars were parked neatly in driveways, and the air was still except for the sound of birds. It seemed peaceful, but peace in such places sometimes came with watchful eyes. Across the street, behind a white curtain, a woman stood still. Her name was Karen, and she had lived in the neighborhood for many years. She had a habit of watching everything that happened outside her window. She told herself it was for safety, but often her eyes searched for things to dislike or judge. The moment David had parked, she had noticed. She had frowned, pressing the curtain closer to her face, and as she continued to watch, her thoughts grew heavy with suspicion. In her mind, strangers had to be questioned. She believed she knew every person who belonged on her street, and when she saw David, she convinced herself something was wrong. When David carried his second box, Karen stepped outside. Her steps were sharp, and her arms folded tightly across her chest. She stood near her driveway, staring at him as though she was an officer herself. David tried to ignore her at first. He had faced this kind of attention before in his life, the kind where silence spoke louder than words. But soon her voice cut through the still air. "Excuse me," she said loudly. "What are you doing here?" David paused, placing the box carefully on the porch. He wiped his forehead and turned to her with calm eyes. "I'm moving in," he answered simply. "This is my house now." He pointed toward the front door where the key still dangled in the lock. Karen shook her head slowly, her expression sharp and full of doubt. "That's not possible. I know who lives here. Families like ours live here. People like you do not live on this street." Her words struck David, but he refused to let them shake him. He had fought too hard to be here, and no opinion could erase the truth that this was his home now. He picked up another box from the truck and carried it inside, choosing silence over argument. But Karen was not ready to let it go. She pulled out her phone, her voice rising as she spoke quickly to someone on the other end. David could hear bits of her words. Suspicious, stranger, does not belong. She moved back and forth as she spoke, pointing toward him even though the person on the phone could not see. David placed the box inside the living room and stood still for a moment. His heart beat a little faster, but his face stayed calm. He had always believed that truth had its own strength, and he knew he had nothing to hide. Still, he felt the weight of her eyes on him, and he knew her call was not just a simple complaint. Minutes later, the quiet street lit up with flashing lights. A police car turned the corner and stopped right in front of his house. The sound of the siren briefly filled the air before it went silent again. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their steps measured, their eyes sharp and focused. Karen hurried toward them, waving her arms as though she had caught someone in the middle of a crime. "There he is," she said loudly, pointing at David. "He doesn't belong here. He's breaking into that house. I told you this was not right." The officers glanced at her but did not answer. Their attention turned toward David, who stood quietly on the porch. His hands rested calmly at his sides, though his heart beat harder now. He knew very well how moments like these could change everything. He knew stories where silence was mistaken for guilt, where patience was ignored, where calmness was misunderstood. He took a deep breath and stepped down one stair from the porch, keeping his hands visible. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Good afternoon, officers. I'm moving into my new home. Here is the key." He held the key up, letting it shine in the afternoon light. The officers exchanged a quick look. One of them walked closer, not with anger but with curiosity. He looked at the lock, at the key, and then at the boxes stacked neatly inside the living room. David waited, his chest rising and falling slowly. Karen's voice broke in again. "Don't believe him. This street is safe and I know everyone who belongs here. He is lying. Arrest him before he causes trouble." The officer turned back to David. "Sir, may I see some identification and proof of ownership?" "Of course," David answered. He reached carefully into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he took his driver's license, then a folded document showing the purchase of the house. He handed them over with calm hands. The officer studied them carefully, then nodded to his partner. Karen leaned forward, waiting for the officers to confirm her suspicions, waiting for them to take David away. But instead, something unexpected happened. The officer looked at David with a small smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Williams. Congratulations on your new home." Before David could respond, the second officer stepped forward. With a respectful gesture, he gave a small salute. The first officer followed, raising his hand in the same way. They stood tall, not in suspicion, but in respect. Karen froze, her mouth opening as though words had been stolen from her. Her eyes darted from the officers to David, confused and frustrated. She had expected drama, yet what she saw instead was honor given to the man she had doubted. David felt his chest loosen, the heavy weight of tension lifting off his shoulders. He nodded in gratitude, his voice soft but clear. "Thank you, officers." The officers returned to their car, leaving the lights off now, leaving peace behind. Karen stood in silence, her phone still in her hand but her power gone. David turned back to his house, lifting another box from the truck. His steps were lighter now and his heart was stronger. The neighborhood had seen a small story unfold that day, one where suspicion tried to cast a shadow, but respect shined brighter, and for David, this was only the beginning of his journey in the place he now called home. After the police officers drove away, the street returned to its calm silence. The flashing lights disappeared and only the sound of birds filled the air once more. David stood near his truck, holding a box against his chest, still feeling the weight of what had just happened. It was not the first time he had been judged before being understood, but it was the first time he had experienced such a moment in the very place he planned to call home. He took a deep breath and carried the box inside. The empty house echoed with each step, but slowly it began to feel alive as more items filled the rooms. He placed the box down in the corner and then stood by the window looking out. Across the street, Karen still lingered near her driveway. Her arms were folded and her lips were pressed tightly together. She seemed unsettled, as if the salute given by the officers had shaken her view of the world. David did not give her any more attention. He had no energy to waste on anger or fear. Instead, he returned to his truck and carried in more boxes. Each one was placed carefully in its place. Kitchen items in the kitchen, books in the living room, clothes in the bedroom. With every step, his dream of building a peaceful home grew clearer in his mind. As the afternoon passed, a new voice called out from next door. "Hello there. Need a hand?" David looked up and saw a man walking toward him with a friendly smile. The man wore work boots, a simple shirt, and carried a bottle of water. His hair was gray at the sides, and his face carried the marks of years of honest labor. "Thank you," David said politely, "but I think I've got it under control." The man shook his head lightly. "Moving is never easy alone. Let me at least help with the heavy furniture. Name's Robert. I live right next door." David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'm David. I'd appreciate the help." Together, they carried a heavy wooden table inside. Robert laughed when his arm brushed against the doorway. "This doorframe is going to give us trouble if we're not careful. But don't worry, I've done this before." David smiled for the first time that day. The tension from earlier slowly began to fade as he worked beside his new neighbor. With Robert's help, the truck emptied faster, and by evening most of the furniture was placed inside the house. When the last box was carried in, Robert handed David the bottle of water. "Welcome to the neighborhood, David. Not everyone around here is the same as the woman across the street. Don't let her spoil your first day." David looked down for a moment, thoughtful. "I didn't expect a welcome like that, but I'm glad you came over." "Thank you." Robert gave him a firm nod. "Good people need to look out for each other. You'll see, this place can be better than how it feels right now." After Robert left, David sat on the floor of his living room, surrounded by boxes. The house was quiet, but it was his. He touched the wooden floor with his hand and whispered to himself, "This is home." The next morning, David woke up early. He had slept on a mattress on the floor since his bed was still unassembled, but even that felt comfortable because it was inside his own house. He brewed coffee in his small kitchen and stepped onto the porch with a cup in his hand. The sun rose gently, painting the sky with shades of gold. As he stood there, he noticed a small group of children riding bicycles down the street. They looked curious, slowing down when they saw him. One of the boys waved shyly, and David lifted his hand in return. Soon the children laughed and rode away, their voices filling the air with light energy. But not everyone welcomed the new day with joy. Karen once again stood outside, trimming her already perfect bushes. Every time her scissors clipped, her eyes shifted toward David. She said nothing, but her disapproval was as loud as words. Later that morning, David decided to take a short walk around the neighborhood. He wanted to learn the streets, see the park, and perhaps meet more neighbors. As he walked, he noticed how carefully each lawn was kept. Some houses had flower beds, others had flags waving proudly, and most had neat driveways. It was clear that people here valued appearances. At the corner, he met an older woman watering her flowers. She looked up, her face warm. "You must be new here," she said. "Yes," David replied. "I moved in yesterday." "My name is David," she smiled kindly. "I'm Mrs. Green, welcome. It's nice to see new faces here." "I hope you'll like it." Her kind words encouraged him. He walked further and reached a small park with benches, trees, and a playground. A few families sat there, and though some looked at him with curiosity, others smiled politely. He returned home feeling lighter, as though the street was beginning to open up to him little by little. But the peace of that day did not last long. By afternoon, a letter slipped under his door. It was from the Homeowners Association. The words were polite but carried a sharp tone. "Dear resident, we have received reports regarding unusual activity at your property. Please note that all homeowners must follow community guidelines and respect neighborhood standards. Any violations will be taken seriously." David read the letter twice. He knew immediately who had filed the report. Karen's watchful eyes had followed him since the moment he arrived, and now her complaints had taken official form. Instead of reacting with anger, David folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. He had dealt with challenges before, and he knew one thing clearly. He would not be chased away from the home he had worked so hard for. That evening, Robert knocked on his door. "I thought you should know," Robert said quietly. "The HOA had a meeting today. Karen was loud about you, but not everyone agreed with her. Some of us think you deserve respect and space to live in peace." David felt a wave of gratitude. "I expected resistance, but I didn't expect support so soon." "Thank you, Robert. It means more than you know." Robert shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. What you need to do is show this street who you really are. Actions will speak louder than any complaint she files." David thought about those words late into the night. He understood that his presence alone had already challenged someone's idea of control, but he also knew that patience, kindness, and steady action could soften even the hardest walls. The next day, he decided to work on his front yard. He trimmed the grass, planted a few flowers he had brought with him, and swept the porch. As he worked, people passing by slowed down. Some greeted him with nods, others stopped to talk. One woman offered him extra seeds from her garden, and a young man asked if he needed tools. Slowly, the neighborhood began to see him not as a stranger, but as someone who cared for his home just like they did. Karen, however, watched with growing frustration. Every flower David planted, every friendly wave he exchanged with others seemed to weaken her control. She made more calls, more complaints, but the officers who had saluted him the first day had left a strong impression. Some neighbors even began whispering that her behavior was becoming excessive. David noticed all of this, but he chose not to engage. He kept working, kept greeting, kept building his home. At night, he sat on the porch and looked at the stars, reminding himself that peace came not from fighting every battle, but from standing strong in silence. One evening, as he was carrying out trash, he overheard two neighbors speaking. One said, "That man seems decent. Karen is making too much noise." The other replied, "The way the officers treated him told me everything. He deserves respect." David walked back inside with a quiet smile. Slowly, the tide was turning. The salute from the officers had planted a seed of respect, and now his actions were watering it. But deep down, he also knew Karen was not finished. People like her rarely gave up easily. She would find new ways to challenge him, new ways to test his patience. What mattered was how he would respond when the next moment arrived. And David, sitting by his window that night, promised himself one thing: he would not be broken. He had earned this home, and he would keep it with dignity. The morning sun spread across the neighborhood, casting long golden beams over the houses and lawns. David woke early again, the habit of years of discipline still strong in him. He brewed a fresh cup of coffee, opened his front door, and stepped out to the porch. The air was cool, and the sound of sprinklers came from nearby yards. It should have been a peaceful start to the day, but David knew peace in this place would not come easily. He looked across the street and saw Karen once more. She was already outside, standing near her mailbox with a clipboard in her hands. She wrote something quickly, then glanced at his house, her eyes sharp as if she was counting every move he made. David let out a quiet breath and chose not to give her the attention she wanted. Instead, he focused on watering the small flowers he had planted the week before. As he worked, Robert walked over from next door. He wore his usual work boots and carried a folded newspaper under his arm. "Morning, David," he said warmly. "Your yard is starting to look good. Those flowers are brightening the whole street." David smiled. "Morning, Robert." "Thank you. I'm just trying to make this house feel alive." Robert nodded. "That's the spirit. Listen, the HOA is having another meeting soon. Karen is pushing for stricter rules, trying to make your move here sound like a problem. But some of us plan to speak up for you." David put down the watering can and met Robert's eyes. "I appreciate that. I don't want trouble with anyone. I only want to live quietly like everyone else." Robert patted him on the shoulder. "Sometimes living quietly is the strongest statement you can make. Just keep doing what you're doing." Later that day, David decided to explore more of the town. He drove to the local grocery store, where he walked down the aisles, filling his cart with food and basic supplies. A few people noticed him, some with curiosity, others with polite nods. At the checkout counter, the cashier, a young man with an eager smile, asked, "You're new around here, right?" "Yes," David answered. "I just moved into a house on Willow Street." "Welcome," the cashier said. "It's a nice town. Don't let anyone make you feel different." David nodded, grateful for the kindness. Small words like that meant more than most people realized. When he returned home, he noticed something unusual. A paper was taped to his front door. He pulled it down and unfolded it. It was another notice from the HOA, this time listing supposed violations: grass height, trash cans left outside, and noise complaints. David frowned. None of these were true. He had cut the grass only yesterday. His trash cans were neatly stored, and he had made no noise except the sound of unpacking boxes. He folded the notice and placed it on his table beside the first letter. He knew exactly who had sent these complaints. Karen's effort to push him away was growing stronger, but David was not a man who gave up. He decided he would attend the HOA meeting himself, not to argue but to show his face and speak his truth. That evening, he worked quietly on assembling his bed. As he tightened the screws, he thought about his past, years of hard work, times when he had been overlooked and moments when his patience was tested. Every step had prepared him for this. He reminded himself that a house was more than walls. It was dignity, and dignity was worth protecting. The next day, Robert knocked again. "The meeting is tomorrow night at the community hall. You should come." "I will," David said firmly. "It's time they hear from me directly." The following evening, the community hall filled with neighbors. Rows of chairs were set up, and at the front a long table was arranged where the HOA members sat. Karen was already there, sitting tall with her papers neatly stacked. Her expression was sharp, as if she had prepared a case for court. David walked in quietly and took a seat in the back row. A few people turned to look at him, some with curiosity, others with quiet support. Robert sat beside him, offering a small nod of encouragement. The meeting began with simple matters: repairs to the playground, new streetlights, and holiday events. Then Karen raised her hand. "I have serious concerns about a new resident on Willow Street," she began. Her voice carried across the hall, filled with certainty. "This man has disrupted the peace of our neighborhood. He has ignored rules, created unnecessary noise, and lowered the standard of our community. I demand the HOA take action." Murmurs spread across the room. Some nodded, but others looked uneasy. Robert leaned closer to David and whispered, "Stay calm. Your turn will come." The HOA chairperson, a man in a suit with kind eyes, looked toward David. "Mr. Williams, would you like to respond?" David rose slowly and walked to the front. He stood tall, his voice steady. "Good evening. My name is David Williams. I moved into my home recently after working many years to achieve this dream. I have followed every rule, kept my lawn trimmed, stored my trash correctly, and made no unnecessary noise. If anyone has doubts, I invite them to see for themselves." He paused, letting his words settle. "I want nothing more than to live peacefully like all of you. I believe in respect. I respect this community, and I hope to receive the same in return." The room grew quiet. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, from the back, Mrs. Green raised her hand. "I have seen David caring for his home every day. He has done nothing wrong. In fact, he has made the street look better." Another neighbor added, "I agree. He greeted me kindly and offered help when my car wouldn't start. That's not the action of someone causing problems." One by one, voices rose in support. The tide shifted, and the murmurs now leaned in David's favor. Karen's face tightened, her lips pressed thin. She shuffled her papers but found no more words to say. The chairperson finally spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you to all. At this time, there is no evidence of violations. We welcome David Williams as a member of our community." Applause filled the hall. Some clapped lightly, others loudly, but the message was clear. Respect had won over suspicion. David bowed his head slightly in gratitude, then returned to his seat. Robert whispered, "Well done. You showed them the truth." After the meeting, several neighbors approached David. They shook his hand, offered kind words, and welcomed him more openly than before. Mrs. Green smiled warmly. "Don't let anyone's doubt steal your peace. You belong here." David thanked them all, feeling a sense of relief. The salute from the officers had been the first sign of respect, but now the voices of the community itself had begun to stand beside him. Later that night, back in his house, David sat on his porch again. The stars shone above and the street was quiet. He thought about the meeting, about the voices that had spoken in his defense, and about the silence of those who had once doubted him. Change did not happen all at once, but he could feel it beginning. Still, he knew Karen would not accept defeat easily. People who built their lives on control often struggled to let it go. He expected more challenges ahead, yet he also knew he was not alone anymore. Step by step, support was growing around him. As he finished his coffee, he whispered to himself, "I will stand firm. This is my home and no one can take it from me." And in the stillness of the night, the house seemed to echo back his promise, standing strong like a guardian of his dignity and dreams. The weeks after the HOA meeting brought a quiet change to the neighborhood. Where once eyes had watched David with suspicion, now some neighbors greeted him with small smiles or friendly nods. A few even stopped to talk, asking about his work, his family, or the flowers he had planted in his yard. It was not a full welcome, but it was a start, and David valued every step forward. Robert remained his strongest supporter, often visiting in the evenings with stories about the neighborhood's history. Mrs. Green continued to bring seeds and advice about gardening. Even the children who once stared from a distance now stopped by to ask if they could pet his dog, a gentle brown Labrador named Max, who had finally joined him in his new home. Slowly, the house began to feel not only like a shelter, but like part of a living community. Yet across the street, Karen remained unmoved. She continued to stand watch from her porch or her window, her eyes always fixed on David's home. Sometimes she wrote notes on her clipboard. Other times she made phone calls that David could hear faintly from his porch. Though she had lost her case at the HOA meeting, she had not surrendered her belief that she alone knew who belonged in the neighborhood. One Friday morning, as David prepared to leave for work, he noticed a letter stuck under his windshield wiper. He pulled it free and unfolded it. The words inside were short and sharp. "You may have fooled others, but you will never belong here." David read the note twice, then folded it calmly. He refused to let the words sink into his heart. Instead, he placed the paper inside a folder where he kept records of every notice and complaint. He knew that patience was not only a choice, but also a shield. That evening, Robert noticed David sitting quietly on the porch. "Rough day?" Robert asked. David showed him the note. Robert frowned, shaking his head. "She will not give up, will she?" "No," David said softly. "But neither will I." Robert leaned against the porch railing. You have more strength than most people I know. But remember, you are not alone. More of us see the truth now. The following week, the neighborhood prepared for its annual block party. It was a tradition where families gathered on the main street, sharing food, music, and games. For David, it was a chance to show who he truly was beyond the walls of his house. When the day arrived, he carried a tray of homemade food to the long tables set up in the center of the street. People looked curious at first, but soon a few neighbors tried the dishes and complimented his cooking. Children laughed as Max wagged his tail and played with them. Mrs. Green proudly introduced David to her friends, saying, "This is the man I told you about. He takes care of his home with heart." As the sun began to set, music played and laughter echoed down the street. For a moment, David felt fully included. Yet Karen sat stiffly in a chair near the edge of the party. She barely touched her food and kept her eyes fixed on David as though every smile he received was an insult to her. At one point, she stood and raised her voice. "I hope everyone here remembers that our neighborhood has standards. We cannot let them fall just because of new faces." Her words brought an uncomfortable silence. But before David could respond, Robert spoke up firmly. "Standards are not measured by suspicion, Karen. They are measured by respect. And respect is something David has shown every day since he arrived." Others nodded in agreement. One neighbor added, "He has done nothing but improve the street. We should be glad he is here." Karen pressed her lips together and sat back down, her face red with frustration. The music soon returned and the laughter rose again, leaving her voice lost in the noise of celebration. After the party, as David walked home carrying empty trays, several neighbors stopped him to say goodnight. One woman smiled warmly. "You've brought kindness to this street. Don't forget that." That night, David sat on his porch with Max lying at his feet. He thought about the party, about the support he had received, and about Karen's outburst. He knew the road ahead would not be without bumps, but he also knew he was no longer standing alone. The next few days passed with small signs of progress. A neighbor asked David to help repair a fence. Another invited him to join a weekend jogging group. Even the children who once rode past quietly now shouted his name with cheerful voices. Step by step, the walls of doubt were breaking down, but Karen's actions also grew sharper. One morning, David found his trash cans knocked over, though the lids were still sealed. Another day, he noticed footprints across his flower bed. He suspected who was behind it, but he had no proof. Instead of accusing, he simply repaired what was broken and replanted what was lost. His silence was his strength, though inside he felt the weight of the unfairness. One evening, as David watered his plants, Karen crossed the street and stood near his driveway. Her voice was low but full of warning. "You can win their smiles, but you will never erase my eyes. I will always be watching." David looked at her calmly. "Then keep watching," he said, "because all you will ever see is me living my life with respect." For the first time, Karen faltered. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She turned and walked back to her house, her steps heavy with anger. That night, David received a call from the HOA chairperson. "Mr. Williams," the man said, "I want you to know that we value you in this community. There have been more complaints, but they are not supported by evidence. Please keep living as you have. In time, truth speaks louder than noise." David thanked him and hung up, feeling a sense of relief. It was clear that Karen's influence was weakening. The following Saturday, Robert suggested something new. "Why don't you host a small gathering at your house? Invite some neighbors for coffee or dinner. Let them see the warmth of your home." David thought about it and agreed. He prepared simple food, set out chairs on the porch, and invited a few neighbors. To his surprise, many came. They laughed, shared stories, and admired his efforts in the garden. The evening ended with smiles, and as people left, they thanked him for opening his doors. Karen, however, sat across the street watching in silence. Her house remained dark while David's porch glowed with light and laughter. For the first time, the balance of the street had shifted clearly against her. That night, David sat quietly after the guests had left. Max lay beside him, and the house felt warm with the memory of voices and kindness. He thought about the journey so far, the police officers who had saluted him, the letters of complaint, the HOA meeting, and now the neighbors who had chosen to stand by him. He knew the story was not finished. Karen's eyes would still follow him, her efforts would still test him, and challenges would still arise. But he also knew something deeper now. He was no longer just a man in a new house. He was part of the community, whether Karen liked it or not. David leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars. His voice was steady as he whispered, "This is my home, and no fear can take it away." The house stood strong behind him, and the street lay quiet before him. The battle was not over, but the victory of dignity had already begun. The morning air was cool when David stepped outside to water his garden. The neighborhood looked calm, as if nothing troubling had ever happened there. Birds sang from the tall trees, and children's bicycles leaned against fences waiting for the day's adventures. Yet David knew that behind this peaceful picture, tension still moved quietly. He had built trust with many neighbors, but Karen's presence across the street remained like a shadow that refused to fade. Max trotted happily through the yard, chasing a butterfly while David turned on the water hose. As the spray reached the flowers, he thought about how much had changed since the day he first moved in. From suspicion and confrontation to friendship and support, the road had been long and heavy. Yet through it all, he had kept his patience, holding on to his belief that respect would win in the end. That week, the HOA announced another meeting, this time to discuss improvements for the neighborhood. David knew that Karen would attend, and he prepared himself for whatever words she might use. He had learned that she was not just speaking for herself, but also testing whether the neighborhood stood with her or with him. When the evening arrived, David entered the community hall carrying a calm presence. He saw Robert already seated near the front, waving him over with a smile. Mrs. Green was there too, carrying her usual notebook. Other neighbors filled the chairs, greeting David politely as he passed. Karen sat stiffly near the side, her eyes fixed on him, her expression sharp. The meeting began with talk about playground repairs, new trees along the sidewalks, and rules about parking. Then the chairperson asked if anyone had other matters to raise. Karen stood immediately. "I would like to speak again about the issue of who we allow into our community," she said, her voice loud and clear. "We must keep our standards high. We cannot let sympathy blind us to what is best for our neighborhood." The hall grew quiet. Some neighbors looked uneasy, while others exchanged glances. Karen's words were not new, but they carried the same weight as before. David rose slowly, waiting for the chairperson's nod. "With respect," he began, "I'm not asking for sympathy. I am asking for fairness. Since the day I moved here, I have followed every rule, cared for my home, and offered respect to all of you. I came here not to divide, but to belong, and I believe that belonging is not given by one person's judgment, but earned through actions." His words were calm, yet they carried strength. Robert spoke next. "We all know what David has brought to this street. He has improved his home, helped neighbors, and shown patience even in the face of hostility. If we talk about standards, then his example raises them, not lowers them." Mrs. Green added, "I have lived here for many years, and I value this place. But I also value fairness. We cannot call ourselves a community if we judge someone for things beyond their actions. David is part of us, and I am proud of that." The room filled with quiet voices of agreement. A man at the back raised his hand. "I was unsure at first," he admitted, "but now I see how wrong I was. David has done nothing but good. I support him staying here." One by one, more neighbors nodded. The chairperson finally spoke. "It seems the matter is clear. We stand together as a neighborhood. Let us not waste more time on division. Let us work on what makes us stronger." Karen's face grew red, but she said nothing further. She sat down heavily, her eyes burning with frustration. For the first time, her voice had not carried the power she expected. After the meeting, several neighbors gathered around David, shaking his hand and thanking him for his patience. Some even apologized for not speaking up sooner. David accepted their words with grace, feeling the weight of change pressing gently but firmly into the community's heart. That weekend, David decided to organize a small project. With the help of Robert and others, he began cleaning the empty lot at the end of the street, which had long been overgrown with weeds. Neighbors joined, some bringing tools, others bringing food and drinks. Children helped pick up trash while adults worked side by side. By the end of the day, the lot looked clear and open, ready to be turned into a community garden. The project created a spirit of togetherness. People who had barely spoken before now laughed and shared stories while working, and at the center of it all, David stood as both a helper and a symbol of what unity could build. Karen watched from her window, her curtains half drawn. She saw the laughter, the teamwork, the respect given freely to the man she had tried to push away. For the first time, she felt the sting of being alone. In the following weeks, the community garden began to grow. Families planted flowers, vegetables, and herbs. Children painted signs to mark each row. David spent many evenings there, guiding the younger ones on how to plant seeds, while Robert built wooden benches for people to sit and talk. The garden became a place of peace, and it stood as a living answer to Karen's anger. Where she had tried to build walls, the neighborhood built growth. One day, as David watered the plants in the garden, Karen walked slowly toward him. Her steps were hesitant, her face unreadable. David looked up, waiting quietly. "I don't agree with everything," she said in a low voice, "but I see now that you are not leaving, and I see that others support you." David replied gently, "I never came to fight, Karen, I only came to live. You don't have to like me, but I hope one day you will understand me." Karen's eyes flickered with conflict. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then turned and walked away. It was not peace, but it was no longer open war. Months passed, and the neighborhood changed in ways no one had expected. The community garden thrived, drawing people together in friendship. Block parties became warmer, with more laughter and less tension. Children played freely, running from one yard to another, their joy carrying across fences. David's home stood proudly, its garden blooming in every season. Max became a favorite among the children, his wagging tail a constant sign of welcome. Robert's visits remained frequent, and Mrs. Green continued to guide the garden with her wisdom. Even Karen grew quieter. She still kept her clipboard, still watched from her window, but her voice no longer held the same force. Over time, some said they even saw her tending her own flowers with more care, as though she too had been touched by the spirit of growth. One evening, as the sun set in golden light, the neighbors gathered in the garden for a small celebration. They shared food, music, and stories, sitting together on the benches Robert had built. David stood among them, smiling as he looked around. He thought back to the day when police had been called on him, the day when suspicion nearly defined his place here. But instead of shame, that day had turned into a lesson. It showed him that patience, respect, and dignity could outshine even the darkest shadow. Robert raised a glass and spoke to the group. "To our neighbor David, who showed us that true strength lies not in fighting, but in standing firm with respect. May our street always remember this lesson." Everyone cheered, and David felt a deep warmth in his chest. He lifted his glass in return. "To community," he said simply. The sound of voices filled the air, blending with the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft bark of Max chasing after the children. The night carried peace, and for the first time, David felt completely at home. He knew challenges would always exist, but he also knew something stronger now. No single voice of suspicion could silence the truth of who he was. His actions, his patience, and his respect had written a story far louder than accusations. The garden glowed softly under lanterns, the neighbors laughed together, and the street felt alive with unity. In that moment, David understood that home was not just a house, but the bond of people choosing to live side by side in respect. And in that truth, he found not only a place but a belonging that no one could ever take away.